Now that we're through with all of that, it's finally time to learn how to mod your weapons. Now I'm a big believer of the fact that weapon modding should be up to you. It's completely your choice of how you want to use your weapons and how you want to apply mods on them. So I'm not going to spoon feed you weapon builds saying use this type of weapon build for this kind of weapon, that kind of weapon build for that kind of weapon. Instead, I'm just going to give you a few guidelines which will help you get the maximum out of the weapons you use. Now first off, you should know that you can add elemental damage types to your weapon, regardless of whether your weapon is actually dealing physical damage or elemental damage to start off with. I'm going to add a toxin mod to this weapon. As you'll see, none of the other damage types change, but toxin damage is added to the weapon's total damage. Now although you can add elemental damage types to a physical damage weapon, you unfortunately can't add physical damage types to an elemental weapon. You'll see this the moment I try to add this slash mod onto this weapon that deals innate toxin damage. There's absolutely no change in its damage and it's just a waste of a mod slot. Now furthermore, I also spoke earlier about combined elemental damage types. Say I wanted to combine toxin and cold damage to get viral damage. It's quite simple. I can just add a toxin mod and a viral mod and these will immediately combine to give you viral damage. The problem comes in when I want to add another elemental damage type. So I wanted to add heat damage as well. If I were to add a heat mod in front of the toxin mod, then toxin and heat would combine, leaving cold as a standalone element. This should show you that when adding mods to a weapon, it's very important which order you add the elemental mods in, because that will bear on what combined elemental damage types you get in the end. For all other mod types, the order you add them into the weapon does not matter at all. If you add an elemental damage type to a weapon that does innately elemental damage, the element you add will combine with the damage type already existing on that weapon. Again, I'm going to use the toxic weapon, the Parasist, to demonstrate how this works. I'm going to add an electricity mod. Now this electricity mod will combine with the innate toxin of this weapon to make corrosive damage. However, the moment that I add a cold mod in front of this electricity mod, you'll see that they combine to give magnetic damage, leaving the initial toxin damage of the weapon unchanged. The best way, however, to grasp these weapon combinations is not listen to any kind of video, it's to experiment with them for yourself. Find out how shuffling different mods in the setup will affect your weapon's damage, and you'll soon get a pretty good hang of it. Now, when you're maximizing the damage on a weapon, there's a few decisions you'll have to make on how you're going to mod it based on that weapon's stats. I'll be breaking this section up into the critical and the status sections as well. Now, whether or not it's wise to mod a weapon for critical hits and critical damage depends on that weapon's critical stats. Generally, weapons will have a critical chance of around 10 and a normal crit multiplier of 2. Now, a lot of weapons have a critical chance of around 10%. However, I wouldn't really recommend modding for crits unless your weapon has a critical chance of 15% or higher. Modding for critical hits is especially useful on melee weapons because melee weapons can use the Berserker mod. This mod will give you up to 75% increased attack speed, which is capable of making even the slowest melee weapons hit really fast. To be perfectly honest, there isn't all that much you have to factor in when deciding whether a weapon is viable for a critical build or not. If it has a high enough critical chance, it's probably going to do very well with the critical build. It's a little more nuanced when you consider if you should mod your weapons for status chance. This is because a weapon's status chance alone isn't a good indication of whether or not it's viable for a status build. The best example I can give for this is the Opticore. The Opticore has a status chance of 25%, which is really good. However, the Opticore is a very powerful single-shot weapon. The problem here is that status builds only shine when they're paired with fast-firing weapons. If you can drown out an enemy in a whole bunch of status effects, it's only then that status builds actually become viable. So if I were to recommend something, I'd recommend to stay away from status builds with weapons like bows and launchers which have only a single shot and very long charge up time. If you are doing status builds, it's best to stick with weapons that have very fast fire rates. You should also note that status chance is affected by multi-shot. Now multi-shot is when your weapon will fire more than one bullet for the cost of one round of ammunition. Basically, the more rounds you're firing at once, the more status chance you will have. Multi-shot is something that makes even secondary weapons with low status chance somewhat viable for status builds. If you use the common mod setup of Lethal Torrent and Barrel Diffusion, you'll usually be firing 3 bullets at once. This means that even weapons with around 10% status chance can very reliably proc status effects. Now if we're talking about status, we have to consider shotguns or shotgun type pistols completely differently. Now if you add the appropriate mods, you can get your shotgun status chance close to 100%. Now this might sound good on paper, but in reality it's really not that effective. This 98% chance means that 98% of the shots you fire have a chance of inflicting one status effect. Unfortunately, this status effect is only inflicted by one of your shotgun's pellets. Thus, a shotgun at 98% status falls into the same problem as a slow firing single shot weapon. You just can't pump out enough status effects in time. However, there are a select few shotguns that can manage to get to the 100% status mark, and this completely changes how status effect works. When this happens, every single shot you fire has a chance to inflict status. You'd expect that since it's 100%. However, unlike before, each and every single pellet will also inflict a status effect. How much of a difference does that make? Let me show you right now. Another thing you should note with status is that beam weapons are horrific for status. Take a look at the flux rifle for example. You might think that it has 25% status chance, it's not that bad, it can proc status pretty quickly. No, this is 25 per second. And the flux rifle fires 10 rounds per second, which means your status chance is actually 2.5. I honestly don't know why on earth Digital Extremes keeps it like this, it's really confusing and very annoying. In general, none of the beam weapons can be seen as viable for status builds. So if you're using beam weapons, I suggest you stay away from them. As a new player, I think this pretty much covers up what you need to know about the basics of how to mod your weapons in Warframe. I'm really not touching on the more complicated aspects of weapon modding because there are some mods that you really will not have access to at this time. The examples of mods I gave in this video can be found pretty easily in game, or you can trade them with other players for a small decent amount of platinum. In closing, I'll say it again, weapon modding is up to you. No matter who tells you how to do something, it's up to you to decide to experiment to find out what works and what doesn't. Sure, you can copy a weapon build off of some website, but it's nothing compared to the learning experience you'll get by building your own weapons and testing out your own builds. And that wraps it up for this video guys. Please consider liking and sharing this video if you found it helpful. You can check out my other content on the Console Casual channel and subscribe if it suits your fancy. As always, this is me signing off, and stay casual.